Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decoding Westworld, an unofficial podcast about the HBO original series Westworld. I'm David Chen.
I'm Joanna Robinson.
And welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. You can find more of our episodes at decodingwestworld.com. You can also email us at decodingwestworld@gmail.com. What we do on this podcast is we recap every episode of Westworld and discuss the crazy theories surrounding each episode. This week we'll be discussing Season 1, Episode 4, Dissonance Theory. So we'll be spoiling everything through Season 1, Episode 4, Dissonance Theory. We won't be spoiling anything from future weeks' episodes, though, and that includes anything on the next time on preview that HBO likes to give us. So before we get to this week's episode, I think we should follow up on a few items from last week's episode. One of the things a lot of people wrote into us about was the glasses that Bernard wears. I commented that I don't understand why he's looking over the glasses all the time. It seems like he's not even using them or he's wearing them incorrectly. But turns out a lot of people think that they are reading glasses or perhaps some kind of transition glasses where like you need to look at them to see some things but not other things. Basically, your eyes get worse as you get older, I think is pretty much what a lot of listeners are trying to tell us. Right, Joanna?
Sure, yeah.
So
unless you're a robot.
Maybe he is a robot and doesn't need the glasses and they're just part of his backstory, part of decoration or something like that. Anyway, so thanks for all the people who wrote in correcting us about that. Now, we had discussed last week, why was that episode entitled Chestnut? Why was Season 1, Episode 2 entitled Chestnut? And we had some speculations, right? But I don't know if we ever concluded on something. Got a bunch of emails, including this one from Courtney B., who writes in that from the Wikipedia page, chestnut is a British slang term for an old joke, often as like an old chestnut. The term is also used for a piece of music in the repertoire that has grown stale or hackneyed with too much repetition. A plausible explanation for the term is given by the Oxford English Dictionary. It originates from a play called The Broken Sword by William Diamond, in which one character keeps repeating the same stories, one of them about a cork tree, and is interrupted each time by another character who says, "Chestnut, you mean? I have heard you tell the joke 27 times, and I am sure it was a chestnut." This play was performed in 1816, but the term did not come into widespread usage until the 1880s. So that email comes from Courtney, and yeah, chestnut basically means something that you repeat all the time, that old chestnut or what have you. And in Season 1, Episode 2, Ford was basically putting the kibosh on Sizemore's new narrative, implying that we had done all that before. So I feel like that is a pretty solid explanation. Joanna, you agree?
Sure.
That sounds like you not agreeing.
Well, it's just an interestingly abstract title when all the other ones have been so, or rather, the original and the Stray are so straightforward. So if we want to take the chestnut to mean a thing that's worn out with repetitive retelling, then I would apply it to Maeve. I don't consider her worn out, but we see her tell the same story 3 times. So if we're going to call anything a chestnut, I would be comfortable calling Maeve the chestnut. There's also some people who think it's the gun that Dolores uncovers in that episode because it's an older version possibly of a gun we see elsewhere. So that old chestnut, I don't know. But I heard a lot of theories this week. I think they're all pretty interesting. So thank you.
The only other thing I wanted to mention is we had mentioned the bicameral mind in last week's episode, but I don't think I ever really went into what it was.
Right.
And I have a feeling it's going to become important, so I just wanted to reiterate what it was. So there's a site online that has the episode scripts just typed out. They're not formatted or anything, but it's just the words typed out. That's super useful. But in this scene, Ford, played by Anthony Hopkins, is talking about Arnold and talking about Arnold's attempt to create consciousness. He imagined it as a pyramid. Memory, improvisation, self-interest, and at the top, he never got there. But he had a notion of what it might be. He based it on a theory of consciousness called the bicameral mind, the idea that primitive man believed his thoughts to be the voice of the gods. And then, like, I thought it was debunked, but as a theory for understanding the human mind, it was debunked, but not as a blueprint for building an artificial one. You see, Arnold built a version of that cognition in which the hosts heard their programming as an inner monologue with the hopes that in time, their own voice would take over. It was a way to bootstrap consciousness. But Arnold hadn't considered two things. One, that in this place, the last thing you want the host to be is conscious, and two, the other group who consider their thoughts to be the voices of the gods, to which Bernard responds, lunatics. So I just, anyway, we had mentioned it, but I wanted to reiterate that, like, this is the theory undergirding the consciousness of the hosts in the show, and I think it's probably going to come to pass that, like, the robots are giving themselves the commands, or, you know, they think they are, like, receiving commands from gods, but it's in fact like just programming that's gone awry. Like, it seems like that's what the show's setting the hosts up for.
Right. So when we hear Dolores, because it's not just like when we see the hosts sort of talking to someone, talking to Arnold, and really they're talking to themselves. It's not just that, but we also hear a voice sort of talking to Dolores, it seems.
Right. Like, kill him, you know, like that kind of thing.
Oh, more like remember.
Well, you choose to remember the remember part. Like when she's trapped by, like, Rebus, you know, she hears a voice that's like, kill him, you know, or shoot him or whatever.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, and to me, that sounds a lot like Jeffrey Wright. And in this week's episode, we get a remember for Dolores that to me sounded a lot like Anthony Hopkins. So it kind of feels like the voices of these god-like figures that she's talked to in the past, and then eventually she's going to hear it's her own internal monologue, and eventually she'll hear it hopefully in her own voice. Is my guess. And you know, and so maybe some of the older bots who are talking to Arnold, they're hearing the voice of Arnold because at one point he was a godlike figure who programmed them, who put in all those voice commands like these violence delays have violent ends, that sort of stuff. We think are old voice commands that Arnold worked into the system.
Right.
So.
But that basically, like, if you're hearing the voices as, like, commands from other people, that's one thing. But if you're hearing the voices as like things that you can act on unilaterally, it's different, right? Like that there you reach a point where the voices have more power, and that is like a frightening prospect, I think, is what it's building towards, right?
Possibly, or just interpreting the monologue, the voices in your head as your own internal monologue, as you being able to have
voice
your own
would take over, right? And if you hear your own voice, then you're going to be more likely to obey it, right? If you think it's, you know, coming from you, Inception style, another Nolan family creation. So, so yeah. Anyway, I feel like it's important enough to just, like, pause and revisit that.
Thank you.
But why don't we dive into this week's episode? So last week we ended Season 1, Episode 3 of The Stray, with Dolores collapsing into William's arms by the fire. And this week, we open on Dolores and Bernard having another one of their chats. And Dolores has apparently just gone through a big ordeal. Bernard shuts off her affect so that they can have a normal conversation. During this whole time, by the way, whenever they do this, Evan Rachel Wood is basically giving a masterclass in acting. Like, literally, she's going to, like, one emotional extreme and then is told to shut it down and then needs to, like, become another person entirely, and you see it all in, like, one continuous shot on screen. It is pretty amazing. But anyway, she talks to Bernard about her parents dying, and at first I thought, oh, this is happening after the events of last week's episode. But in fact, doesn't mention running off with a guest, doesn't mention running off with William, you know? And so the show, Joanna, is playing games with its timeline with us, right? With this scene. Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I guess the most straightforward linear interpretation you could have is that Bernard sort of snatched her while she was sleeping, right? And then
like,
talked to her.
Deposited her off, like...
And then put her back.
That strains credulity. Also, she didn't mention any of the crazy stuff that happened last week. So
I think she said her parents are dead.
Yeah, but, like, yeah, and then she ran. Yeah, you're right, I guess. But then she didn't mention, like, collapsing in a fire someplace. I don't know. You're right. You're right. It's possible.
No,
It's possible.
no, I don't think that is right. I'm just saying that could be the most straightforward interpretation.
Yeah.
I think we are dealing with two distinct timelines.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm back on the 30 years previous boat.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll talk more about whether that theory is plausible at the end when we talk about crazy theories. Let's be sure to mention the piano player, by the way, at the end of this week's episode of the podcast. But in this dialogue scene, Dolores and Bernard talk, and Dolores basically describes a mental, intellectual, and emotional awakening, right? That basically is her becoming more and more human. And that's when Bernard mentions the maze to her, right? And he says, finally says more about what the maze is. The goal is to find the center of it. And that's, all he says at this point, but we learn a little bit more about the maze later in the episode. And then Bernard presents to her the choice of whether she wants to be more human or not. And she says that she wants to be more human. She wants to be free, is how she puts it, right?
Yeah.
So any insights you want to highlight from this scene before we move on?
One I would say is that, he offers to erase the pain of losing her parents, and she says, the pain is all I have left of them. Bernard said an almost identical thing when he was talking to sort of his wife on Skype about his dead son. He was like, the pain is the only thing I have left of him.
That's right. Yeah.
So this is either her sort of adopting some of Bernard's philosophies through conversation with him, or they've both been hardwired with the same programming because they're both robots. I'm just saying.
Yep. No, very plausible. Dolores wakes up next to William. She has a gun in her hand. Now, in the show notes, you put, this is the shiny new gun. Are you saying this is the gun that, theoretically can shoot hosts, or is this the Rebus's gun? I just assumed it was Rebus's gun. But I guess she didn't have it with her, last week when she collapsed.
What I'm saying is that I think they could be the same gun. If we are dealing with two,
the same gun, meaning the gun she found in the drawer that just vanished last week, right?
Yeah.
And then the gun she later finds, that Rebus drops before he's about to rape her, right? You're saying this could be the same gun, or?
Well, to be more clear, the gun she pulled up out of the ground.
The gun she pulled up out of the ground and the gun that she has in this week's episode.
Off his belt could be the same gun. The gun off his belt is new. The gun she dug up off the ground could be 30 years older, is what I'm saying.
All right. So
it's significantly diminished. The gun now, listen, this is probably a common make and model of a gun. Are they even called make and model? That's a car thing, right? This is a common make of a gun, I'm sure, in Westworld. But I think it's sloppy storytelling to have two different guns. If Dolores is going to have a gun, it should probably be one gun. Is how I feel about it.
Well, yeah, and also why, presumably William, I guess he didn't fear her, but why would they have left her with the gun? Would they not have been afraid of what could happen with that? I don't know.
Well, and we didn't really see the gun on her when she wandered into camp, but I don't, I'm not nitpicking that. I'm just saying we've seen her with two guns, right? A gun she pulled out of the ground that was in her drawer and then was not in her drawer, and the gun she pulled off Rebus's belt before she shot and killed him and ran off. They're the same gun. I've scrutinized the images, right? They're the same gun, only one just looks 30 years older. So to me,
30 years older or just older, Joanna?
Older. So to me,
which one looks older?
The one she pulled out of the ground.
Right.
So to me, this could be, if we are dealing with two timelines, which if the show is doing two timelines, they are playing some dirty pool in terms of trying to trick the viewer into thinking it's one timeline. But let's say we are tracking two timelines. The age of the gun might be a way, if it's the same gun, might be a way to tell which timeline we're in.
All right. I don't know. I feel like I already left the two timeline train behind last week.
Okay.
But if you're back on the train, then maybe I can be persuaded to hop aboard again as well. Anyway, so Dolores and William, we're just going to talk through all the stuff that happens to that plot line, right?
Ready.
So they, Dolores wakes up. William and Logan, kind of try to figure out what to do. William wants to keep, pursuing the bounty that they're on. Logan's like, dude, I'm not spending $40,000 a day just to do this. Actually, that's something that I think they mentioned last week, was how much it costs per day to do the Westworld, $40,000. Let me ask you a question, Joanna. Do you feel like that is a reasonable price?
Well, we have no idea what inflation is. Right.
So maybe $40,000 is like $3,000 in today's money. Right.
I assume it's still a lot because apparently, I got into an argument with an accountant about Westworld actually, and he was like, "How could even $40,000 a day possibly cover the repairs of however many robots they damage every day and that sort of thing?"
Well, they clearly have economies of scale there, but yes, continue.
Well, my guess is that they have investors, which we know they have investors. So I think it's not just pure profit from the guests that's keeping this whole operation afloat.
It's like a freemium model, you know what I'm saying?
All that being said, we have no idea how much $40,000 is worth.
Right.
On Mars or wherever they are, but whenever they are,
You learn a little bit more about William and Logan. Like, William is going to join Logan's family. Logan's family has a stake in Westworld, like a business stake, and says, like, with our family, everything is business. So anyway, they go off to. I have a feeling that familial connection will come into play, like, in a big way later on. But they go off into a town. And also, we should say here, you've noted in the show notes that Stubbs says to flag Dolores, given that she's off loop, but they can't. What do you call it? They can't tell if it's going to be disruptive because Ford is disrupting everything with the new storyline. Joanna, don't you feel like that scene with Stubbs seems to indicate that this is all just one timeline?
I mean, if you want me, I'm ready to talk about this. If you want me to.
I'm ready.
In my understanding,
we should clarify. That the theory that Joanna is referring to is the idea that William's character, played by Jimmy Simpson, is the same character as the Man in Black, played by Ed Harris, and that Ed Harris's character is just the Man in Black is just 30 years later version of William, right? And that the show is doing some creative cutting to make it seem like these are all taking place in the same present day, but that in fact they're taking place 30 years apart. So, right.
So, in my theory of of this, 30 years apart or so timeline, is that the reason why they say, "Oh, we can't tell whether or not she's with a guest," is because in the present, Dolores is wandering around by herself on a mission from Bernard to find the maze. And that's why later we see her in the town. She walks in by herself. And then later we see William there with her. So let's assume, if I'm right, Dolores is wandering around on this maze mission by herself in the present. And in the past, she's with William. So when she's off her loop and, someone tells Stubbs she's off her loop, he's like, go get her. That's in the present, but the whole fudging of we can't tell if she's with a guest or not, to me seems part of the really dirty pool they're playing about trying to hide the fact that they're doing two timelines.
I see. I think it's possible. Me. So basically, her being with William in the show basically happened 30 years ago, and then Stubbs talking with someone else in the map room about Dolores happens 30 years later than the William stuff, right? And that's just another completely separate deviation that Dolores has. My interpretation is she's gone off the reservation twice, and we're going to see it play out twice. Right.
Once now, but this is not the first time that she's woken up, and she woke up 30 years ago, and that's related to the whole incident that happened 30 years ago. Is my guess.
I've been thinking a lot, but just as a completely separate point, and it doesn't have that much bearing on what you just said, but I've been thinking a lot about our theories conversation last week, and I think one thing that I would really like to focus on, just for my own personal life. I'm not saying in this podcast, but I'm saying I think what it made me realize was theories are only enriching of one's understanding of the show. If the theory ends up being true, it in some way adds to the themes or adds to the virtuosity of what they're trying to create, or adds to your appreciation of their craft or something like that. But like a theme, like a theory like Westworld is on Mars. Like, okay, if that is true, who gives a crap? Like, how does that enrich your understanding of the show if Westworld is on Mars? On the other hand, if this two timeline theory is correct, then it gives the Man in Black and William storyline like a lot of resonance that you can start in one place and end at the other. That makes it really interesting to me.
But what I agree with you, but I think what's frustrating for the viewer or what's frustrating for me is if it's true, like I'm spending so much of my mental energy trying to figure this thing out, and maybe I should just stop and like go along for the ride, but I'm spending so much mental energy figuring this out because I really want to know what Dolores is going through when.
Right.
I want to track Dolores's progress. And if I'm seeing two different Doloreses, it's one Dolores, but at two different times in her life, then that's the high concept messing with my exploration of this character. It's like in The Prestige, or can we talk about the spoiler of The Prestige?
Yeah, so we'll spoil The Prestige.
Okay, we're going to spoil The Prestige. In The Prestige, we're watching two different characters played by Christian Bale throughout the film, right? Because the whole premise is for this magician to do his trick, he's twins, right? And he's alternately disguised as this other person in their normal life. And in any given scene, you don't know which Christian Bale character you're watching, and you don't even know that you're watching two of them until the end, right?
Yep.
But that disrupts your whole understanding of this character throughout the film because you're not watching one character go through an arc. You're watching two different men who love two different women behaving erratically, going through this. Like it just really disrupts your entire attachment to that character. And so that's what I'm struggling with Dolores is I really
But are you saying that's a downside of the movie? Because I think it adds to the movie, in my opinion. I think it's like, wow, like now you view all those interactions differently because you know the truth. And I feel like if Dolores is in two different timelines in the show, it will be the same thing. It'll be like, wow, like I thought she was learning and developing this whole time. Turns out nothing has happened. Like she's exactly the same, which I feel like would also add to your understanding. Go ahead.
Partially. I think that's partially true. I think you're partially right. That just the fact that she's, all this has happened before and will happen again sort of thing.
Yeah.
That is interesting. I think that is. But in terms of me as a viewer, I will feel cheated watching what I think is the progression of a character when in any given scene I don't know who I'm watching. Do you know?
I think that's a completely reasonable reaction. It's not my personal reaction.
Yeah.
But I can totally understand like why you would feel that way. So
yeah.
Let's keep talking about. Let's keep this theory alive until
Okay.
there is so much evidence against it.
Yes. All
that
right.
you are just willfully disregarding the text of the show.
Yes.
Which I'm gonna guess is gonna come in the next two episodes because just like reading interviews with Jimmy Simpson and the creators of the show, I just don't think. I don't know. I think you're right that it is still possible, but it just doesn't feel like that's what they're going for. But
there's just a lot of oddness, like the fact that we've been asked by a lot of our listeners to try to use character names as much as possible. So Jimmy Simpson is William, right? Yeah. So the William character has not interacted. He doesn't interact with Teddy, with Maeve. Like there's just a lot of things that and people have gone like really granular on this in terms of like the lengths of the women's skirts in the saloon, but like the fact that they're in the saloon and Maeve is not there at all, and I think you can explain it within episode as that's when she was like pulled and Clementine was the madam, but it just seems like really convenient and strange to me. So honestly, until we see Ed Harris, who's the Man in Black, right?
Yeah, like talk
to William.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have a hard time with this. We'll see.
So there's a follow-up to last week's episode with regards to Elsie and Bernard and Teresa. Like last week's episode, Elsie saw a host cave his head in with a rock. And after like carving out what she believed to be like a sign of Orion on some of the props in the park, and so this week they kept trying to assess what happened wrong, and they try to explain it away, like maybe it's Samaritan programming, like that, like maybe it's part of their pre-programmed set paths, but Elsie is not having any of it. Bernard surrenders control of the situation to, I think, QA, right?
Yeah.
You kind of find out there's like different divisions of Westworld, and it's like kind of bureaucratic, and they each have like ownership over different things, sometimes of the same thing. Bernard surrenders control, and he's like fine to not have to deal with it, but Elsie is still really upset because she thinks like there's clearly something going on here that is a bigger problem than that these people are willing to acknowledge.
And she's right?
Yeah, yeah.
She's like the only one who's right.
Well, I think what's really surprising to me is that like how much crazy shit is allowed to go down in the park without people acting more, like without them doing more to restrain things. And you see in this episode that they have the ability to like shut down plot lines immediately. So yeah, I agree with you. Like something clearly wrong is happening. And Elsie and Maeve, I'm sorry, not Elsie, Dolores and Maeve having these like crazy visions. That's something that you should theoretically be able to register, in your gigantic map, where you're monitoring every single plotline that's happening. And I don't know why it's not being more closely monitored. Maybe it will. Maybe it will be next week. We'll see. But anyway, Bernard responds with complete skepticism and says, "Hey, like you're the one who has the creative mind, and look, it's not even Orion. Orion has 3 stars on the belt, and basically tries to dismiss her concerns." So, anything you want to mention about this sequence and what we learn about Elsie stuff?
I think Elsie is really right that she's the only one not with the hidden agenda
she
that we met on the
broke
show.
The fourth wall when she's saying like, "Why am I the only person who like thinks anything's wrong?" Yeah.
Right. So I find her maybe the most sympathetic out of everyone we've met. Right. She's just
her and Dolores and William, I would say, are like the most sympathetic characters. Yeah.
Yeah. So QA stands for quality assurance. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I do like that Elsie is really has no patience for the QA people, for anyone who's not her department messing around with the behavior of the bots. So Anyway, I like her a lot.
Oh, I skipped the rest of Dolores and William's storyline. Sorry about that. So later on in the episode, let's just finish that off. William and Dolores go to Las Mudas, which is the town where Lawrence's family lives, and Dolores sees Lawrence's daughter, who mentions the maze, and also like flashes back to like a plotline that I think Dolores and the daughter were both in, if I'm not mistaken, right? And so a lot of people have been asking, like, what is the deal with the daughter? Like, is the daughter just kind of some kind of oracle figure, or what is your opinion on what's going on with Lawrence's daughter?
The way I see it, the Man in Black, sort of by his own steam, and Dolores have been set on the path towards this maze, and Lawrence's daughter is like a gatekeeper, someone who shows someone to the maze, right?
Yeah.
So, who used to be part of this other plotline, because when we see her in the flashback, she just seems much more innocent, right, than she is now. Right. In a pink dress. That scene is very curious, and I urge people to rewatch it if they're trying to grapple with a possible multiple timeline theory. Because the kid is not there on the side of the fountain when Dolores walks in, and then she's there, and then she's gone again.
Yes. So Dolores is clearly seeing things from like separate moments in time.
Either she's glitching, she's remembering, or either she walks into the town by herself and is in the same town with William during 2 different time periods or something. But anyway, then someone that presumably either Stubbs or whoever was in Stubbs' positions 30 years ago sent someone to go collect Dolores. She gives that really scary look, and William intercedes.
That would have been quite a coincidence, don't you think? If
she's off her loop, she's off her loop, and she needs to be collected.
Yeah, fair enough. I think at some point in this episode, she also kind of has this crazy vision, right? Like she's like looking into the light and she sees kind of the behind the scenes of Westworld, as Maeve does, in the episode as well. So that's worth mentioning. But anyway, at the end, Logan and William like have a shootout where they finally do this bounty, and they find this guy who, like theoretically, Logan refers to as an Easter egg, right?
Right.
So I have the script here. Logan says, like, relax, man, you have no idea how lucky we just got. So the bounty hunter they're with is a host, and when Logan hears what this guy they've captured like wants to do, he just murders the bounty hunter, much to Dolores and William's consternation. And then Logan says, relax, man, you have no idea how lucky we just got. And William says, lucky? You just shot an innocent man. And Logan says, no, he's a robot just like her and just like Slim here, except that Slim works for El Lazo, and El Lazo is our ticket to the best ride in the park. Your bullshit mission led us right to an Easter egg. So, end quote. But yeah, that's apparently where they're heading, and it's something that Logan is going to get into as well, apparently. So, the only thing I want to point out about this whole plot line, and this is like the last scene with Dolores and William and Logan, is I feel like Logan's callousness is definitely sowing seeds of dissension in the Logan-William relationship, right? And like that's going to come back to bite Logan in some way later on, whether like Dolores ends up harming him or William ends up betraying him or something like that. Anything you want to mention about your thoughts on this scene, or this plot line, I should say?
Yeah, it seems to me that they're future brother-in-laws. That's my interpretation of this whole thing. And it seems also to me that they did not start this trip on like the best of terms to begin with. So the more, like I like all of my in-laws, but like plenty of in-laws don't like each other. So let's just take two guys who are complete opposites and throw them in this like high pressure situation and watch their relationship just completely implode, I think is what we're going to see. So giddy up.
Yeah. It should be interesting to see that thing deteriorate. Also, I mean, William basically accuses Logan of being a terrible person because he's harming the robots. What do you think of that? Do you think like you have to be a bad person to harm the robots, to harm the hosts?
That's such
because Logan responds like, well, they're just robots. They're just they're just like they don't have consciousness. They're not real. It's not real life. Like if someone smashed a brick wall with a bat, or like took a bat to like a piece of wood or something, like you wouldn't react that way. But because they talk and look like humans, you do react that way. So does it indicate faulty character, or is William overreacting?
I guess I can only say from my personal point of view that if I went to Westworld, I would have trouble shooting robots in the head, considering that they seem so humanoid and they bleed and all of this sort of thing. I understand cognitively that they're not humans, but they're so humanoid that. And I don't play video games where I shoot a lot of people, that I just can't imagine myself doing that unless it were, as William did in defense of, the Clementine character, he shoots someone. And he got shot first before he did that. So I don't know. What do you think? Do you think you could go to Westworld and just shoot people?
Yeah, I think what we just learned moments ago is that you and I should not go to Westworld together. But
would you shoot everyone in the head?
No, I think that like Logan has a point, and it's too bad that he also happens to be an asshole, because otherwise I feel like it would be a much more sympathetic point he's making, which is like people go to places like this to let out to let off some steam, to express desires they can't express in polite company,
right?
And that's not necessarily bad. I think.
Right. Well,
the robots having consciousness throws a whole wrench into that equation, though. Like if the robots can experience pain, if like are they really experiencing pain, or is it just like a robotic response to pain? Like there's a lot of questions about like how much suffering is actually happening.
Sure, but maybe this is just like bullshit. I completely hear you, but maybe this is just bullshit rationalization on my part. But if you take a guest character like the woman who's with Teddy, whose name is Marty, I believe, she shot plenty of people, but she's chosen a storyline where she's shooting bad guys.
Right.
Right? So there's this like weird veneer of morality over it, right? Where she's shooting bad people in defense of good people, or, you know, like she's chosen a kind of target practice that has a moral right behind it. Whereas Logan just shot a bounty, like he didn't even have to shoot that guy in the head. He could have tied him up. It might have been more
don't
sporting.
forget he like stabbed that old man with a fork in the hand last week.
That's right. Yeah.
Or a couple weeks ago.
Logan's a bad dude, you know.
Yeah, I agree. Like I wish there was a more sympathetic character to make that point. Because regardless of whether you think it's okay to harm these things, Logan is still an asshole. So.
Well, and I mean, I guess that's kind of Ford's point. I don't know if you think of Ford as more sympathetic, but Ford carving that robot's face open, you know, he's making that point in a less like Black Hat or obviously Black Hat kind of way, right? Where he's just like, this is just meat on circuits, right? Is what these robots are. So
on that note, it seems like Black Hat and White Hat is like an actual. Firstly, it is a term like that terminology is used in our real life today's society. You know, like it's often referred to as like different kinds of hacking. You know, like you can find problems in a system like in a Black Hat way or a White Hat way. But it seems like it is an accepted nomenclature in the universe of Westworld as well. So I don't know if that was acknowledged prior to this week, but it does seem weird to me that like when he was presented with the choice of the hats, I didn't know that it came with moral repercussions. But you know, I guess it does.
Right, and Logan's like, go full Black Hat. Let's go full Black Hat. Yeah.
Can you go full Black Hat if you're wearing a white hat? You know, like, is it... Anyway, maybe the hat choice is completely separate from the white hat, black hat terminology. Who knows? But it is part of the nomenclature of the world. Anyway, just a few other storylines to mention. Firstly, let's talk about what happens to the Man in Black and with Lawrence and Hector and Armistice. Basically, he's looking for where the snake lays his eggs, and they go out to this location and they find Armistice bathing. So you got some nice HBO nudity in there. And she is the woman who is played by Ingrid Bolso-Berdal, who was a member of Eschaton's robbery that we saw in the first episode of the show, I think, right? But here, the Man in Black appears to have intercepted her at an earlier point in that plot line, right? Like, it seems like the same robbery plot line because we later see, like, an almost exact recreation of that scene.
Right, yeah.
But he's intercepted her, like, earlier in the plot line, and he wants to know the truth behind this tattoo because he thinks, like, knowing the origin of the tattoo is going to get him to where he wants to go. And where does he want to go, Joanna? Like, what does the Man in Black say about what he's trying to find this episode? We learn a lot more about it, right?
Right. He's got a lot of quotes. Ed Harris has a lot of quotes about the world and the nature of it. But he says he describes Westworld as a world you can do everything you want except die. And then he talks about, he knows who Arnold is. He says, Arnold died right here in the park, but I believe he had one story left to tell, a story with real stakes, real violence. So to me, that's what he's described. He believes the maze is a place where you can I think he's looking to die in the maze. Like find a real confrontation in the middle of the maze, the real world stakes. Because he said in a previous episode, I don't plan to ever go home. So this feels to me like a suicide mission, but you tell me.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. In fact, one of our listeners, Pat Sponigal, who's followed a lot of our podcast work, wrote in about this, and I kind of agree with this theory. Like, the Man in Black appears to be hunting down a high-level narrative, a hidden high-level narrative of Arnold's that will get him some kind of super secret achievement, unlocked access to the park workings, and I assume will make it possible for the androids to harm humans. Wyatt appears to be part of this narrative too. This weird cult in Wyatt appears to have been only recently added to the story by Ford, but that now doesn't seem to be the case. This can't be a coincidence between Ford's narrative and the Arnold narrative, end quote. We'll get to that in a bit. But it does seem to me that what the Man in Black is looking for is a way to make the park more real, and to make it so that there's, like you said, real stakes, real violence. And this is something that, like, we already know Arnold's been kind of like messing with the system, making it so that these people can, these hosts can become real. We know that the Man in Black is looking for a way to make things more real. So it feels like the maze unlocks the secret to, like, I don't know, unlocking unconsciousness in the androids and or making them able to harm humans.
Maybe.
Which would, of course, unleash hell in the park. But we also get a real tiny hint of what the Man in Black actually, like, he appears to be a person in the real world. Like, there's a lot of debate about, is the Man in Black himself an android playing part of some meta game within the game, you know? But someone appears to recognize him from the outside world. A guest appears to recognize him and said, hey, I just want to say your foundation literally saved my sisters. But before they can finish, the Man in Black threatens him and says, you know, I'm on my vacation. If you say another word, I'll cut you, like that kind of thing. So it does appear that the Man in Black is a real person in the outside world. My question for you, Joanna, your foundation literally saved my sister's what?
Life.
My sister's life. Maybe it could be life, Joanna. Could be a lot of things. Could be like my sister's car.
My sister's consciousness into a robot host.
Yeah, my sister's haircut. Like, maybe he owns a salon. Like, you just don't know.
We don't know.
You don't know what is
But I think a good assumption is that he runs some sort of medical charity. He seems like some big philanthropist.
Yeah, like kind of like a Bill Gates like figure or something.
And some good guy that's completely at odds with this character that you see inside the park, which makes sense. It's sort of like his purge, right? He needs to go and be full black hat in order to go out and be a saint in the real world most of the time.
Yeah.
I have such a good theory. Okay, let's go ahead.
Well, also, like, in this quote that you've written down here, like, talking to Lawrence, like, no choice you made was ever your own, the Man in Black says to Lawrence. What if I told you I was here to set you free? So it does sound like he's here to break them out of their preordained loops and make it so that they have consciousness, they have the ability to make decisions and potentially harm or kill guests. But
I think you're right. Yeah.
But so that's what it seems like the Man in Black's going for. What is your theory?
No, just we'll get to it later. We'll talk about
we have our whole, like, crackpot theory section, so we'll get to that right at the end. So anyway, what's curious too, like, I read an article in Vulture called "Westworld's Man in Black is a Classic Bad Gamer" by Catherine Van Arendonk, and great article. But what this article is referring to is basically, like, when you play a game, sometimes there's people who just, like, try to enjoy the game as the creators have intended, and there's other people who kind of ruin the game just by, like, probing the limits of the game. You know, they will go and like, hey, here's a cutscene, let's skip past it. You know, I'm supposed to do it in this preordained route. I'm going to find, like, another way using cheats to do it. And oftentimes, like, when gamers do this, they ruin the experience for others as well. And it seems like that's exactly what Ed Harris's Man in Black character is doing. He's like, I don't have time for, like, this paint by numbers stuff. I need to cut to the end of this, and so he, like, circumvents the whole jail breakout. You know, he does all these things to, like, mess narratively with the game, and in doing so is able to obtain the answer to his question early, which is that the tattoo, the one missing part of the tattoo, is for Arnold, which is, like, theoretically. I'm sorry, not Arnold, Wyatt, right? Wyatt is a part of this crew that, like, messed up Armistice's family when she was young.
Right.
And, like, that's where the tattoo came from. So,
according to her now, we don't know if that was just implanted the same way it was just implanted into Teddy, right?
Right.
We don't know if that was just implanted into her, though the Man in Black, I believe, seems to know who Wyatt is. So, like, you know, Ford just implanted Wyatt into Teddy, and he could have just implanted him into Armistice, but the Man in Black already knows who Wyatt is. So Wyatt wasn't just created 2 seconds ago by Ford, you know?
Right.
In theory.
Right, which is kind of crazy to think about, that, like, this Wyatt person was already an existing part of the mythology, and Ford is building something around it. Like basically, Wyatt is not Ford's creation, I think, is the big reveal here, right?
Or not a new creation.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, this all ties in my bigger theory, but we'll get to that. But what I was going to say is we get some fun stuff from Hector about what he believes spiritually, right? Which, what does he say? He says, all of it, God's men, everything else will end badly. No one will be saved, is what Hector gives us his like religious, his theology to the Man in Black. And the Man in Black basically says he believes the same thing. And this will come into play because, Hector later has a conversation with Maeve about his, spirituality of this world, what they've built around what they know of this world.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. And this is the second, Hector action set piece that we get that's kind of fun versus, episode 1. I did want to go back quickly to what you said about that vulture piece, which sounds really interesting to me. It's funny, I heard a similar thing on the I've been listening to the Bald Move podcast on Westworld, which, like, loath as I am to give my competition some boost, all their episodes are like 2.5 hours long. They go really deep on every single episode, and they're gamers. I'm not, so I found it interesting for them to talk about Logan and William as two different kinds of players, where Logan is the kind of player where, like, you're a new guy, you go over to Logan's house, you've never played the game, Logan's played the game a million times, you want to explore the game in your own way, and Logan's like, no, that's boring, let's do it this way.
Yeah.
No, skip past that, let's do, that's not important, let's do this. So, like, Logan as a bad gamer, a different kind of bad gamer, as well as the Man in Black, I thought was interesting. So.
I agree, yeah. That's totally dead on, like, representation of what those kinds of gamers are. And, and I think a lot of us have been the William character and know how frustrating that is. So that's why Logan is an especially irritating character to me. Not to say I have not been Logan at times in my life, but still.
Yeah.
Eschaton, Hector Eschaton, interesting name for a character. Eschaton, of course, is a noun in theology that represents the end of the world. So not super... Continuing the Nolan, strategy of making name be a on-the-nose representation of what that character is supposed to be.
I read a new. Sorry, please tell me to shut up if I'm like coming in with too many theories. But
I would never tell you.
I read a fun theory today about Teddy being sort of the nuclear option. Teddy flood, as in biblical flood, as in like wash it all clean. And since Teddy can just like kill anyone except for that group of whites men who came after him last week, but like Teddy can just mow people down. Teddy is like a cleansing flood option. And we see him hook up with a Man in Black. So I don't know. That was a fun thing. Like all the sort of biblical options or religious options with these things, and that's gotten me thinking also about the word host, like hosts as in like, we're here to be your host, but also host is the common term you use with angels, a host of angels. And since we're dealing with these like God and devil and fallen angels,
the heavenly hosts, yeah.
The heavenly hosts, right? A host of angels. So like if we're dealing with like Ford as a God figure, the Man in Black is a devil figure, or the Man in Black is a Lucifer figure, or something like that, and fallen angels, these are all just like the way too much inside my head way I have of thinking about the names on this show.
I think it's entirely plausible, that the names have a lot of symbolism in the show. So I don't think that is off the table.
But Eschaton, definitely. It's spelled differently, but like definitely. Yeah.
And I think like, Maeve's name, according to Pat Sponigal, who wrote into Decoding Westworld at gmail.com, is Irish for mythological and magical queen.
Queen Mab.
Yeah.
Queen Mab.
Shakespeare had a fairy queen named Mab, which is derived from the same Irish root Medb. So that could be tying in, given that Maeve is seeing a bunch of stuff that's like otherworldly in this episode. But we'll get to that in a second. You mentioned how Teddy hooks up with the Man in Black. Teddy was not killed last week, apparently, and just was strung up to die in this episode in like a very uncomfortable situation. I felt bad for James Marsden seeing that. I was like, how many takes did they have to do of him tied up to that tree in like an incredibly, uncomfortable position? And I was also disappointed that Teddy doesn't die in every episode. I thought that would be a nice recurring trope. All right, just two more plot lines to discuss, and then we'll get to theories. But Teresa goes to see Ford in the park. There's this gigantic earth mover that looks incredible, where Ford's like rearranging everything, and they have like a confrontation where Ford is trying to like explain, hey, you should give me the time and the resources to do what I need to do, and Teresa's trying to say like, hey, let's just why don't we take a more conventional path, pretty much, right, is what I feel like she's trying to do. And Ford says, like, I've seen many of you, like, company people, and I've outlasted many of you. That's the dynamic. I'm obviously not reciting the dialogue exactly as it was. But then Ford, I keep saying Arnold instead of Ford, but Ford, in a stunning display of power, is able to freeze all the hosts in position.
Yeah.
With no seeming like way that we can determine based on what we see on screen, right? Like maybe
I think we see him flick his finger to sort of release him.
Right.
So, and we saw him do the finger gesture before with the snake.
Yeah, but I assumed that like the snake needed to like see the finger gesture. Yeah, like there's no way all those people in the field like saw him do it. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So like, what is he do? Like, does he have like implants built into his hands? Like who knows what's going on there? But either way, it's an incredibly effective sequence.
One of my favorite sort of little moments in this scene, and a commenter in our live chat room just reminded me, Zappa Johns, is that we see someone on Reddit did a side-by-side of these, so that's how I noticed it. But all of the hosts that Sizemore built for his Odyssey on the Red River journey were being used to dig the trenches for Ford's new plotline, and it was like a monk and a saloon girl, and they weren't dressed for labor. They were just like all the people that Sizemore built were being used for Ford's new plotline, which seemed like a pretty vindictive move on Ford's part. So,
well, maybe he's just making good use of resources. But I did like the idea that at the end of that scene, you see the Earth Mover tearing into the field, which apparently, like that section of the park has been around for ages, right?
Since Teresa was a little girl,
right? So Ford is really like tearing old things up and reinstating the new. He also mentions to Teresa, like, hey, they already sent a representative. The board already sent a representative. I thought they would have told you. Basically, also, like, as a power move, saying, I know more about the board's machinations than you. So, yeah, I really like this whole scene. It's very well executed and kind of establishes this power dynamic in a way that's, like, pretty threatening. Like, not kind, not collegial between coworkers. And Ford is a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, the mindfuck of him bringing her to this table where she was there with her family as a child, and then basically saying he's going to tear it down, like her memory of the park, right. His complete reading of her. And then, this tantalizing line when he said, they already sent a representative. I thought they would have told you. Some people are theorizing that representative is already in the park. So is it Logan, if Logan's on the current timeline, since he mentioned having a stake in the company? Is it the man in black? Is he a representative? Or is it someone we haven't seen but is already on their way? And the only reason I mentioned that as an option is I know the actress Tessa Thompson is in this show, and she said in an interview that she was playing someone behind the scenes. So that would be my best guess as to who the board is sending would be actress Tessa Thompson from Creed and the upcoming Thor Ragnarok. I'm eager to see her since she's a performer I really like, and I think it's crazy we haven't met her yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, so some open questions like who is the representative. I think one thing that people brought up, I do a weekly Periscope about Westworld, just to kind of get my thoughts out, kind of prepare myself for this podcast, to be honest, and work out any theories that are stupid that I shouldn't mention or like things that I should mention. But one thing someone asked in the Periscope this week was, like, does Ford in this scene confirm that Bernard is a host, right? Because he does mention Bernard. I don't think he confirms he's a host, right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think he could know what they were up to, even if they were just two humans, sort of conducting an affair they thought on the sly, and he's like, "Listen, I know everything that goes on here." but I don't think there was any confirmation
Right.
about Bernard being a host.
Here's the exact wording. We know everything about our guests, don't we? As we know everything about our employees. I do hope you'll be careful with Bernard. He has a sensitive disposition.
Yeah.
Now, that is a very creepy way of saying that, but it could just be Ford saying, like, I know you two are friends with benefits, and, like, just be careful. You know,
I mean,
like,
you know that I think Bernard is a host.
right.
But I don't
But the way
think
he said it was so creepy, I was like, maybe Bernard is a host. You know, like, that's, again, no evidence in the text to support that, but the way he said it was so, like, you know, it just was a very off-kilter way of saying it, that it just seemed to imply there was something going on there more than just, you know, Bernard and her sleeping together. So
I agree with you.
Finally, the last storyline, Maeve. We see a close-up shot of Maeve's face in this episode that mirrors a shot we saw from last week, with her kind of having a flashback. She remembers a shootout. What a horrifying scene, by the way, like being conscious for your own death and getting like sterilized and all that stuff. And she sees like these people that work at Delos Corporation kind of doing the cleaning up. This is kind of a shout out, I think, to the original Westworld film.
Okay.
Where whenever they had a reset, they'd have like these stagehands come out and do it. Like these basically are the equivalent of the stagehands, right? Except they have a much higher tech suit. They have like gas masks on or like breathing apparatuses, and they have like all this protection on. But she sees them, and then like she tries to draw it, and then when she tries to put the drawing away, she finds that she's already stashed many drawings there, which is an incredibly frightening and effective scene. It's like a past version of herself trying to communicate with her that she can't remember.
Yeah.
It reminds me of an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Cause and Effect, where the crew was trapped in a time loop and they tried to send messages to future instances of the time loop to try and like warn them of what was happening. Very much like this, where past versions of Maeve have been communicating with Maeve. And you know, that's another sign that like this show is playing fast and loose with the timeline, is like this is the first time we've seen like Maeve really get bothered, but like much time has been passing, you know what I mean? Like we haven't seen the past Maeve instances, so like who knows what time we're in right now, right?
Right. How many times has she woken up to this, right? And wait, in that Star Trek episode, did they communicate with playing cards? Is that how they do it?
The playing cards are part of it. Basically, basically they program data to send messages to future instances of data. Yeah. And like one key plot point is that they're playing cards, and then so like at one very effective point in the episode, they start being able to predict what hands Data is going to deal.
Right.
And then later in the episode, Data sends a message to himself to deal like different things. So then the same scene plays out, and they're trying to predict the cards, but then it's not the cards that they're predicting. So like, well, I thought it's a really effective episode. I really liked it.
Yeah.
But it's cause and effect. That's a Star Trek TNG episode, and this episode certainly has echoes of that.
Nice.
Yeah. All the TNG episodes, I think, are the next generation of episodes. I believe are available on Netflix. So
yeah,
good
they
to check
are.
them out. But okay, so what was really mind-bending about this element? Firstly, like when she discovers the underground thing, amazing performance by Tandy Newton. Just like realizes the horror of what's going on. Later on, she sees like a Native American girl has a figurine that's like this, right? Mm-hmm. So then the men in spacesuits are already part of the mythology of the Westworld universe. But the question I asked when I did my Periscope and was reflecting on this is, you know, I can understand the desire to make them part of the Westworld, like the Native American mythology, because then you have something you can use to explain when people see the behind-the-scenes stuff. But if that's the case, why wouldn't you program Maeve with knowledge of that? You know, why would you make that something that she needs to find out? Do you know what I'm saying?
Or why wouldn't they just scrub this? Like, I feel like they are sloppy, and they should have scrubbed it entirely from...
Well, no, I mean, I feel like what we're seeing is that, like, potentially there's, like, dormant programming that's causing people to do things like remember things they're supposed to forget, or come to life when they're in sleep mode, which we've seen 2 times already. So I feel like, okay, they tried to scrub it, but maybe Arnold put something in there that like futzes with it, and that's what's the effects of what we're seeing. So
no, but I mean, like, why wouldn't the programmers, who are in theory in control of every single blade of grass in the park, why wouldn't they scrub all mention or thought of, like, shouldn't they know that the drawings are under the baseboards?
Right.
And shouldn't they know that that sketch from the Native American little statue exists? Like, I feel like we're gonna see.
Well, I think they definitely know the statue exists. Like, the reason they implanted that in that culture, in the realm of the universe, is so that people would be able to explain away the sightings of the spacesuit guys, right?
Yeah, I understand that's one interpretation, and it might be, you might be right. You're often right, but another interpretation is that this is just a thing that's bled in from all the people who have like woken up and seen it. It's not like something that the behind the scenes people implanted, but rather something that's bled into their inherited mythology. To me, it seems like sloppiness on the part of the park techs, but I could be wrong, and you could be right that happens sometimes.
Well, the park techs are definitely being sloppy. There's no dispute on my end about that.
Right.
Otherwise, they'd be catching all this crazy shit going down. But anyway, then an amazing final sequence where Maeve, like, interrogates Eschaton while unlocking the safe. They cut into her. They find a bullet. Right?
Yeah.
Come on, guys. Sloppy
tech.
Sloppy maintenance of the park. That's just garbage. You should be ashamed of yourselves, Anyway, they find the bullet, and then Maeve's like, hey, none of this matters, which is like an amazing moment. She realizes, hey, we are in a time loop. I can do what I want,
Yeah.
I can make out with Mr. Eschaton here, and everything's going to be fine. And
so good.
Yeah, and like amazing editing, cutting between the safe and the Q&A. Pretty good stuff. Anything else you want to say, or shall we go straight into theories?
And then in theory, they die in a hail of bullets, right? Because the bullets like rain through the door, though we don't see the bullets hitting them. But yeah,
but presumably they die.
Yeah.
Very stylish way to end. And of course, this episode was directed by Vincenzo Natali, who I'm hoping we'll have a chance to interview in the next week or two about this episode. He is a super talented guy, and I'm a huge fan of his work. So, and so like little touches like that, I feel like that might be Vincenzo Natali's at work. But
he did that great horse episode of Hannibal, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
He also made a very creepy, disturbing film called Splice. But anyway, so let's talk about theories, Joanna. Some crazy theories we should mention, right?
Sure.
I'll get us kicked off, okay?
All right. Go down.
The big crazy theory is that, and actually I believe this theory. Okay, so I'm not just putting it out to mock it. I actually believe it. Is the piano guy in Ford's office is Arnold, or a host version of Arnold? Reason I think this. Firstly, the piano is like a huge part of the opening credit sequence. This week, the piano song is The Cure, right? For Forest, is that right?
A Forest, yeah.
Yeah. That's the song that is on the player piano this week. But if you look at the photo of Arnold that Ford shows last week, and look at the player piano guy in Ford's office, it does appear that they are the same person. You were talking about the Prestige earlier today, and that's a situation where basically you put a beard on someone and they're like the same guy, but they look kind of different. Seems like, maybe Arnold isn't too far.
So this is a theory that friend of the show, Jesse Karp, first floated to me last week, and I have looked so closely at the photo and so closely at every angle of the guy playing the piano. and I cannot tell you with any confidence that it's the same person. But you're exactly right. You both invoke the prestige here. Like the thing about the prestige is to hide the guy in plain sight, which is exactly what the player piano guy in the office would do. There's in that scene, if you watch it, it's when Ford is telling Bernard all about Arnold. At one point, he just like looks directly at the player piano guy while talking about Arnold.
Yeah.
So if you want to rewatch that scene with the idea that the player piano guy is Arnold, I think there's a case for that.
But to my earlier point, like, does that deepen our understanding of the show? I don't know that it does. Like,
yeah, go ahead.
I think more explanation is required before, like, we understand why Ford is keeping a host version of Arnold in his office. But if there is an explanation for that, it could be interesting. So I don't know that that's like, if that's true, if that's Arnold in his office, like, does that automatically make it more interesting? I don't know, but it could. There could be something there that could make it more interesting. So
I'm still enamored of the idea that Arnold's consciousness has been downloaded into Bernard, so that's what I'm sticking with.
So I saw a theory that Arnold's consciousness has been downloaded into, like, the player piano, and, like, he's actually just...
And he loves The Cure.
Yeah, no, like, he is the player piano. Like, that's who he is, which I think is pretty crazy. But I do think it's worth mentioning that, and we already talked about it earlier, that, like, the Man in Black's version of Arnold's death is very similar to Ford's version of Arnold's death, which is not something that, like, you know, we thought that Ford was just lying through his teeth the whole time talking about Arnold's death, but it does seem like that's another person that's corroborating it. So
Sure.
All right, Joanna. Any crazy theories to report on?
Here's my theory.
Tell me a theory.
That Ford obviously knows the Man in Black is in the park, and in fact, well, am I allowed to talk about the next time on preview? We have a rule about this on Game of Thrones.
I prefer not. But...
Okay. So, but like even without that, right? Okay, so Ford obviously knows the Man in Black is in the park, right? He knows everything. He knows he's there. In theory, he probably knows that he's looking for the maze, right? Is it a coincidence then that Dolores is set on the path for the maze? So we have the Man in Black looking for the maze, and then Dolores, via Bernard, is set on a path to the maze. Okay. So you've got these two figures closing in on the maze, and my guess is that the season ends with the two of them at the center of the maze. That would be my guess. If Dolores and the Man in Black knew each other 30 years ago, like, is she some kind of weakness for him? We've already seen him encounter her, obviously, but, like, is she some kind of... Will this confrontation be very emotional for him and dredge up who he was 30 years ago? Is she the ultimate weapon against him? Or the best weapon against him?
now that you mention it, he does say something along the lines of, let's start at the beginning, Dolores.
Yeah, he does do that. Let's take it back to the beginning.
Right,
yeah.
and if William is, like, an earlier version of the Man in Black, then it's like, that would be the beginning. But he says it, like, ominously. He says it like, let's start at the beginning, basically before I rape you. Okay, here's a theory, Joanna.
We don't know that he raped her.
Maybe he doesn't rape her.
I don't think he did.
Maybe he's really cutting off her scalp in that scene so he can get the maze map or something.
Right. I think it has to do with the map. I don't think he raped her in that scene. Because, the Man in Black, he just seem over raping people? Like, he's already... Like, he's been there for 30 years. He's like, raping Dolores would bring him no interest or pleasure. Killing Teddy brought him no interest or pleasure. Do you know? It's just sort of like he's going through the motions. But he knows he needs to, like, talk to Dolores because maybe he was there at the maze with her 30 years ago and needs to... And him talking to her helps set everything in motion. I don't know.
All right. Well, we'll see. I think... I'm wary of putting too much time into this Man in Black is William theory, just because if it turns out to not be true, won't all this time we spent discussing it have been totally wasted? Like, how do you feel about that?
See, I don't know, wasted. This is what we talked about last week, where I'm just conscious that if he's not William, no one's allowed to be disappointed because it's not something that the show ever promised you, right? or you can be disappointed if you want. I just think it's unproductive. You know, like we talked about this. Like theories are fun and fine as long as you realize that you're probably wrong and that the answer is probably more straightforward than you think. And, you know, everyone's on the same time.
I think the reason I bring it up is because if it's not true, I'm frustrated that the show made it feel like it is so plausible. Do you know, like, because the show could have easily removed doubt that that's the case by now. Could have easily made it so that you're sure that they're different people by now, with just like, you know, William bumping into, you know, the Man in Black on his way into town or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, they could have made it 100% clear, and they didn't. And maybe it's because they couldn't schedule Jimmy Simpson and Ed Harris for the same shoot. You know?
Or because Jimmy Simpson was cast later, which he was. But
you know what I'm saying? Like, but that's kind of where my question comes from. Is like, I'll be frustrated at the end because the show made it seem like it was possible, and then it didn't end up happening.
Well, I mean, like, let's say they are on the same timeline, and the showrunners had no idea that anyone would come up with this theory. Do you know? It's sort of like, you know, let's go back to Game of Thrones if we want to, like the Bravos Fight Club theory that people had that Arya was, the waif was like Arya's manifestation or whatever. And they were looking for evidence for this all the time. But like, I 100% guarantee you that's not something that ever occurred to the showrunners because it was not the truth. So then it's not their responsibility to prove to you that the theory that you made up is not true, right? It's not the show's responsibility to have William and the Man in Black meet and be like, well, howdy, different person altogether, just to prove something to you.
No, you're right. You're right.
If they didn't know you were going to come up with it. But I do believe something funky is happening with the timeline that they are intentionally manipulating in a very Nolan way. Just like, I mean, I think The Prestige is a really good, like, go rewatch The Prestige. It's a really good comparison here of the, I mean, on multiple levels of the art of misdirect. So I believe that they are trying to do something very funky with the timeline, which is just really hard and crazy to do over 10 hours. That's the point I keep coming back to, that this Nolan-esque sort of messing with plots is a tricky thing to do without actively deceiving your audience, not just like omitting information, but actively, consciously cutting things together in order to deceive your audience. And that rubs me a little bit the wrong way. Do you know?
Yep, I totally agree. Peter Soretta, editor-in-chief at slashfilm.com, is listening to us right now, and he told me to bring up one of the silliest theories that I've heard. Okay. Which is that Bernard is Ford's android recreation of Arnold, and the reason, I mean, that theory in and of itself is fine.
That's my theory. Yeah.
But that the reason we know that is because Bernard Lowe is an anagram for Arnold Weber. Now, I know what you're thinking. Is Weber Arnold's last name? We don't know. We don't know if it's his last name. So.
But if you listen to The Ones Who Knock, our Breaking Bad podcast, you'll know that David hates anagrams. So
because the reason I hate anagrams, by the way, is just that, like, they are, in my opinion, the most extreme form of crack pottery that almost never pans out. But then, unfortunately, I was proven wrong this season of Better Call Saul when the show titles actually did spell out an anagram for a major character's name. And it really upset me. It really upset me. It delegitimized my entire stance that we should never pay attention to people who think anagrams are a good way of decoding shows. But Bernard Lowe is an anagram for Arnold Weber if Weber is in fact Arnold's name, which we don't know if it is or not. But yeah, what do you think of that, Joanna? Do you think the anagram is going to come into play?
I mean, I'd love for it to, mostly because it would irritate you.
Yeah. I mean, it would drive, like, it would make me question the nature of my reality.
I know. Yeah. But the anagram thing actually is pertinent here because, the creators of Better Call Saul put this little anagram thing in the episode titles of the second season of Better Call Saul as an Easter egg they thought the viewers would never find sometime over the summer. You know, like the viewers caught on way quicker than Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould thought they would. And Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould had to be like, "Welp, you got us. Oops, we thought we were being really clever, but we forgot that Reddit has like an unending amount of time on their hands," right? So I think that might be the same thing about the William Man in Black plotline. Is like the Nolans were like, "Oh man, this is gonna blow their mind," and then like as soon as William appears, someone on Reddit's like, "Hey, the logos are different," and then like all season we're obsessing over this, whereas the Nolans were like, "Oh, we're gonna prestige them," and they are gonna go like, "What? Christian Bale's two people?" Instead, you've got this like very bright, active, engaged community on Reddit figuring your shit out, showrunners. So
yeah,
it's hard.
the logo difference, what you're referring to is that in episode 2 of the show, you see a logo of Westworld that is different than the logo we see in episode 1. Like when William shows up, the logo is different. And so then there's speculation that the reason that's the case is because it's in a different period of time. But it could also just be as simple as like they had to reshoot a bunch of stuff for the pilot or the first few episodes. And
no, but you see the modern logo continuously in the backstage, and you see that logo that was on the platform where William arrived. The only other place you see it is in the changing room when he gets ready, and wait for it, on Anthony Hopkins' old lab coat when you flash back to CGI Anthony Hopkins. Those are the 3 times we've seen the old logo.
Okay, but wouldn't the robots that were older, right, have operated more like that cowboy robot that zipped himself up in the bag?
But we're talking about two different timelines. There's the beginning of the park, and then there's the incident 30 years ago. And Jonah Nolan has said that the park is not 30 years old. That there was a long period of time where the park existed before the incident of 30 years ago.
Damn, you're good, Joanna. Damn, you're good. I keep trying to trip you up.
I'm ready.
And it's not working. It is not working. All right, Joanna. I'll climb back on this William is the Man in Black theory train for at least a couple more weeks.
Just watch Ed Harris and Jimmy Simpson share shots together next week.
Yeah, they're just going to it's going to be their opening scene is they're going to bump into each other. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Will you eat crow at that time?
Sure.
Publicly on the show, yes?
You know me. I'm game for admitting when I'm wrong. Sure.
All right. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of this week's episode of Decoding Westworld. Joanna, per our predictions, we started each episode at like 30, 40 minutes. 4 episodes in, this episode is an hour and 20 minutes long. So I anticipate the times will get even longer as the season wears on. But in the meantime, Joanna, where can people find more of your work on the internet this week?
I'm on 4 podcasts this week. You can hear me on Storm of Spoilers, Fighting in the War Room, Little Gold Men, and this podcast, Decoding Westworld. You can find me on VanityFair.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at JoeWroteThis.
Find all my stuff at davechen.me, and find my film The Primary Instinct at theprimaryinstinct.com. You can also watch it for free on Hulu right now if you have a subscription to Hulu. Email us at decodingwestworld@gmail.com. Find more episodes of our podcast at decodingwestworld.com. We'll see you guys next week.